House of Commons sound. 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 House of Commons sound.
Order, order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Scotland, John Stevenson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to two great Scots who have sadly died in recent days. Winnie Ewing blazed a trail for women in politics. She was admired by colleagues from all of Scotland's parties as one of the most important politicians of her generation. Our thoughts are with her friends and family, particularly her children, Fergus and Annabel. And also, with Craig Brown's passing on Monday, Scottish football has lost a true legend, held in high regard by players and fans across the country, and again our thoughts are with his loved ones. Mr. Speaker, I will turn to question number one. I'm encouraged by the resilience that the Scottish labour market has shown despite global issues still causing significant economic challenges. The latest official figures show that Scottish unemployment is close to a record low at 3.1%, and I welcome this fact.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we are to grow the Scottish economy as well as the national one, it is vital that we have a skilled workforce and the right levels of investment. It is also important for areas such as the borders between Scotland and England that we have the least friction in trade and labour market conditions. Would the Minister agree that politicians of all persuasions have a responsibility to ensure the maximum opportunities for whatever side of the border they live on, to ensure that we have the least amount of friction, particularly for those looking for employment?
Secretary of State.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. That is exactly why this government introduced the UK Internal Market Act. It's to protect frictionless trade across the United Kingdom. And on the matter of opportunities which my honourable friend raises, for those on whatever side of the border they live on, Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of some regret that Scotland is the highest taxed part of the United Kingdom.
Pete Wishart, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you ever so much, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State and I represent large rural constituencies with large hospitality and tourism sectors. Can he therefore name one benefit that ending freedom of movement has brought to the labour market in either of those sectors?
Chair of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Scottish National Party like to blame everything on Brexit. But the fact is, for the last 2 years, we've had record immigration into the United Kingdom. That's a simple fact. Record immigration since record figures since immigration figures began.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I had the pleasure and privilege to be elected to the Scottish Parliament in 1999 alongside Winnie Ewing. Undoubtedly an iconic figure of modern Scottish politics, from the Hamilton by-election to Madame Ecosse to the opening of the Scottish Parliament. I always found her to be kind, sympathetic to new members, and she always had the best stories. May she rest in peace. Does my right honourable friend agree that the one thing that will reduce confidence in the Scottish labour market is the prospect of another independence referendum, real or de facto?
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend's absolutely right. Of course it is. Business doesn't like uncertainty, and this constant harping on about independence is just causing uncertainty amongst business. And the reality is that the devolved administration in Scotland should focus on the things that it was set up to do, focus on education standards, focus on the health service, focus on drug deaths, focus on getting some ferries rather than trying to create the island clearances.
Julie Elliott.
Number 2, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 2, 4, 5, 7, 8 and 11 together. Originality of thought by the opposition parties as ever. The United Kingdom Government recognises the challenges facing households due to elevated costs of living, so has taken action to protect struggling families with the largest support package in Europe. UK-wide support to households to help with higher bills is worth £94 billion, or £3,300 per household on average.
Julie Elliott.
Thank you. Over the winter, too many have had to make the decision on whether to heat or eat. In fact, too many couldn't afford to do either. With food inflation well in excess of 15%, with specific staple items much higher, people simply can't afford to eat. What advice does the Minister have for households in Scotland and in Sunderland, where I represent, who are worried about being able to provide food for their families?
Mr Speaker, of course, inflation is a problem affecting many Western economies, particularly those in Europe, and it's right that this government continues to provide cost of living support while sticking to our plan to avoid adding unnecessary inflationary pressures. The average household in Scotland receives £1,850 from the UK government, which, with the poorest households receiving £2,445. Now, around £5.2 billion was spent in 2022-23, which was more than the entire annual Scottish Government's welfare budget.
Which, Mr Speaker, with 13 consecutive hikes in interest rates, the IFS have warned that 1.4 million mortgage holders could face a 20% fall in disposable income. This mortgage crisis started with a disastrous Tory mini-budget last September, and it is adding to the cost of living crisis. So can the Secretary of State or his Minister please explain what the hell his party are doing to clean up the mess they have created?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, we do not accept analysis of the honourable member. We recognise this is a concerning time for homeowners and mortgage holders, but we cannot ignore the fact that interest rates have risen across Western economies as a result of the pandemic and the impact of the war in Ukraine. The Government remains committed to responsible economic management to bring inflation back under control, which is the only way to achieve sustainably lower interest rates and mortgage rates.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's not just homeowners that are affected by spiralling interest rates. They also contribute to an average rent increase of over 8%. The Scottish Government are doing their bit using the limited powers they have. They've extended the rent cap. They've extended the evictions freeze until March, so nobody in Scotland will be thrown out of the house because they're poor. And of course in Scotland, thanks to SNP, we're not selling off council houses, we're building more of them. What exactly is his government doing to protect tenants in Scotland and prevent an increase in homelessness?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I know that the honourable member has recently announced that he will be standing down at the next election, and whilst he and I clearly do not agree politically, I recognise that over his 8 years of service to the people of Glenrothes is worthy of recognition. As I said previously, tackling inflation is this government's priority, which is the best way of supporting mortgage holders and also those people who rent accommodation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Minister aware of the recent YouGov survey commissioned by Feeding Britain, which shows in May almost 1 in 6 adults in Scotland reported that they or someone in their household had accessed food aid in the previous 3 months?
Shocking.
Does the Minister now not agree it's now time for the Government to launch a food poverty strategy? And will he support the principles outlined in my private member's bill to end food bank use by 2030?
Mr Speaker, this United Kingdom Government remains absolutely committed to supporting the most vulnerable in society during these difficult times, and that is evidenced by providing support to those people who need it most. For example, over £137.5 billion to those pensioners on benefits, £67.9 billion on benefits to support disabled people and people living with health conditions, and a further £114.3 billion on working age and children welfare benefits. On top of that, from April, we've also seen an uprating of benefits and state pensions by 10.1%. This government is taking the action most required to support those people in most need and reject the analysis that he makes that this government is doing nothing.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Under the last Labour government, absolute child poverty levels in Scotland fell from 40% in 1997 to 20% in 2007. However, that has all but been reversed. The SNP are not on track to meet their own goal of lowering child poverty to under 10% by 2030. You can shout, but there's a reason why the members there may be doing that. Right, so what steps is the government taking to ensure that child poverty levels return to the low levels last seen under the last Labour government?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right to highlight the failures of the Scottish Government, and by their reaction they don't like when they are challenged. They try and shout and heckle and shut down any contrary argument. As I've said before, this Government remains absolutely committed to supporting the most vulnerable in society and will continue to support all parts, whether they be children, householders or anyone else who needs support during the pressures of the cost of living.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last year, £4.2 billion of balancing costs was added to our energy bills. This means paying wind farm operators to turn off their turbines and at the same time paying gas operators to fire theirs up due to grid constraints and a lack of storage. However, pump storage hydro schemes in Scotland could create 15,000 jobs and lower bills. So why is this government not fighting tooth and nail to get contractual arrangements in place to get these schemes up and running?
Mr Speaker, in relation to the cost of living, which is the theme for this question, the energy price guarantee will save households £160 for the period until July and brings the total government support for energy bills to £1,500 for typical households since October 2022. We're also ending a premium that over 4 million households in the UK pay for their prepayment meters, bringing their charges into line with comparable customers who pay by direct debit. So this government is absolutely committed to supporting those people facing pressures under the cost of living.
Mr Speaker, I know the Prime Minister and the Government is entirely focused on helping people deal with the pressures of the cost of living. However, the SNP's government focus seems to be elsewhere. As we've seen this last weekend, the First Minister announced that the next election would entirely be focused on yet another independence referendum. Does the Minister agree with me that this is the wrong priority for Scotland and that Scotland's two governments should be working together to better deliver public services and help people with the cost of living?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Both of Scotland's governments, the UK Government and the Scottish Government, should be focused on delivering better public services and supporting people through the cost of living. And instead we hear the SNP cheering about another independence referendum. This government remains focused on delivering for the people of Scotland. I'm just sad the SNP government in Edinburgh failed to do so.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I join the Secretary of State from earlier in paying
tribute to Winnie Ewing and Craig Brown, who both passed last week. I hold Craig Brown personally responsible for moments of complete unbridled joy and total heartbreak. They will both be sadly missed. And can I also wish the Secretary of State a happy birthday, a significant birthday for next week, Mr. Speaker. Whoever shouted 80 from the back benches isn't far away from his age next week, so happy birthday to him. Mr. Speaker, nearly 5 months ago, the Secretary of State promised a meeting for David Williamson, a Scottish terminal cancer patient, and neither his department or the Secretary of State for Health has been able to arrange that. I wonder if we could get that sorted as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, millions of people across the country are facing spiralling mortgage rates and rents. Statistics from Citizens Advice this week alone show that Scottish mortgage holders searching for advice on repossession is up 341%. So does the Minister agree with the insightful advice from the Prime Minister that worried mortgage payers who are hit by a Tory mortgage premium should just hold their nerve?
Mr. Speaker, in relation to the right honourable gentleman's comments about David Williamson, I can confirm the Scotland Office did write to the Department for Health about this case, and I will undertake to ensure that we pursue that moving forward. In relation to mortgage rates, the Government recognises that this is a very concerning time for homeowners and mortgage holders, but we cannot ignore the fact that interest rates have risen across Western economies as a result of the pandemic and the impact of the war in Ukraine. Of course, the Bank of England sets the base rate, which has an effect on mortgage pricing, and as the honourable member will remember, it was the Labour government that made the bank independent of government. As the honourable member will also know, the Chancellor has agreed with the mortgage lenders just of last week there will be a new mortgage charter which will hopefully provide some protection and reassurance to mortgage holders.
Speaker, the Scotland Office is saying that Scottish mortgage holders should just hold their nerve, and what the Minister didn't say in his whole list of excuses was that the Tories actually crashed the economy, which is the result of some of these mortgage interest rates. Isn't it incredible that in the worst cost of living crisis in living memory, the Prime Minister's entire approach is to tell people to hold their nerve, and the First Minister's approach in Scotland is to launch proposals for a de facto referendum and a written constitution, something he admits himself Scottish voters don't want. Scotland has two governments so out of touch with the priorities of the Scottish people that polling shows 70% think they are doing little to help with the cost of living. So does the Minister agree with me that what Scots need and deserve is a UK Labour government solely focused on delivering the priorities of Scottish voters?
Mr. Speaker, this United Kingdom government is very clear that now is not the time for another independence referendum. But, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party so often end up backing the SNP policy after policy in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, since we're approaching the summer holidays, perhaps Keir Starmer should take his flip-flops and see if there's space in the SNP's camper van.
We now come to SNP spokesperson, Dr. Philip Wood.
Thank you very much, Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If I could thank the Secretary of State for his kind words about Winnie Ewing and Craig Brown, and obviously pay my own personal tribute to Winnie Ewing, who was such an icon for our party and almost uniquely served in 3 parliaments, our own Madam Ecosse. Food inflation in the UK at over 19% is 50% higher than among our EU neighbours. Yet both the Government and Labour Party seem to be in complete denial about Brexit's contribution to this cost-of-eating crisis. With 28% of the UK's food coming from Europe, how will his government prevent a new surge in food prices next winter when extra checks, post-Brexit checks, are introduced at the border?
Mr. Speaker, as the Chancellor has said, food price inflation has been a problem in many parts of Europe. In Germany, Sweden, Portugal and Poland, food price inflation is around 20%. So this is not a UK-only problem. This government is doing everything they can to deal with Putin's invasion in Ukraine and the aftermath of the pandemic. And we're also tackling one central focus, which is bringing inflation down and ensuring that that is this government's one priority.
Dr. Philip Wood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The London School of Economics shows that a third of food inflation in the UK is due to Brexit. But also with the loss of freedom of movement and European workers, Brexit has also caused £60 million of Scottish fruit and veg to rot in the fields, threatening farms and further increasing the cost of even domestic produce. As a Brexiteer, shouldn't the Secretary of State apologise to the Scottish public, including his own constituents, for driving up food prices, and maybe explain why he still supports the proven liar who was one of its main architects?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we do not accept SNP's analysis. And as I've already explained, food inflation is an issue in many parts of Europe. I think it's a bit rich for the SNP member to be raising food price inflation and rising costs, especially when leaked papers this morning revealed that SNP ministers in Edinburgh are discussing raising council tax by up to 22.5%, meaning that some people will end up paying £751 more a year. Under the SNP in Scotland, local government funding has been gutted, forcing councils to slash local services and impose large tax hikes. I will take no lessons from the honourable member about bringing prices down for households in Scotland.
Jim Wakefield.
Question 3, Mr Speaker.
Show stay.
Mr Speaker, the United Kingdom is the most successful political and economic union in the world, the foundation on which all our businesses and citizens are able to thrive. When we work collaboratively as one United Kingdom, we are safer, stronger and more prosperous. We are better able to draw on the institutions that unite us, like the health service, the armed forces and our world-class education system, and better able to respond to challenges such as supporting families with the cost of living and leading the international response to Russia's illegal war in Ukraine.
Christian Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Secretary of State think that a former Prime Minister fined by the police, subsequently to have found to have knowingly lied to both the late Queen, this House and therefore the public, to have strengthened or weakened the Union?
Well, I say to the honourable gentleman, the union has never been stronger. What we know is this Prime Minister has said that those in public life should aspire to the highest standards of propriety.
Can I ask my right honourable friend, has he seen the video released by the Scottish Government in which Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson makes a range of spurious claims about devolution being under attack by the UK Government, and what has he thought of it?
So stay.
Well, Mr Speaker, I did see Angus Robertson's video clip, and I think I counted 16 false claims in the space of 1 minute and 40 seconds. That's a false claim every 6 seconds, Mr Speaker. Pretty impressive, even by his standards. So, as usual, it's the nationalists who are desperate to invent a grievance. But the reality is it's the UK government that respects devolution. We support devolution. We strengthen devolution. The only people who want to destroy devolution are the ones who want to rip us out of the United Kingdom.
Shadow Minister Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Privileges Committee's conclusions were crystal clear that the former Prime Minister knowingly misled this House and then subsequently tried to intimidate the very committee he set up. Why did the Secretary of State not set an example and vote for the Privileges Committee's report?
Well, Mr Speaker, as I've said to the media last week when I was interviewed and this question was raised, very simply because I felt the report was too excessive in its conclusions.
Alexander Stafford.
Question 6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, Scotland's energy industry is vital to supporting the UK's energy security. This government has listened to Scotland's energy industry and understands the need to encourage industry investment. That is why we've recently announced the Energy Security Investment Mechanism, which removes the energy profits levy if oil and gas prices fall to normal levels for a sustained period prior to March 2028.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It was great to hear a cheer for the Secretary of State as he stood up. Now, I'm sure my right honourable friend would agree with me that hydrogen production will be vital to meeting both the UK's energy needs and also our net zero targets for the future. Can my right honourable friend set out what the UK government is doing to promote the development and production of hydrogen in Scotland?
So stay.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Mr Speaker, low-carbon hydrogen is critical to delivering energy security. It presents a significant growth opportunity and it will help the UK reach net zero. And we've doubled our ambition up to 10 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030, and at least half of this will come from electrolytic hydrogen, drawing on the scale-up of the UK offshore wind, other renewables and, of course, new nuclear.
McKay.
Will the discussions with the Scottish Government also include the problems with National Grid transmission, which mean National Grid are paying to turn off wind turbine production because they can't afford to get it to the south of the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I say to the Honourable Senator, by law, the transmission network charging is a matter for Ofgem, who are an independent regulator. They have recently produced a report on charging reforms, and the government is looking at that.
Sir Lane Saxby.
Question 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, whilst forestry is a devolved policy, we continue to work with the devolved administrations to deliver a UK-wide step change in tree planting and establishment.
Slade Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, 50% of forestry planting was much-needed productive forestry for our construction and manufacturing industries. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that there should now be a new UK-wide target that aims for 60% of new planting to be productive, allowing Scotland to lead the way for the rest of the UK?
So State.
Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend is a champion for this industry. It is the UK government's ambition to increase planting across the United Kingdom. And I know that she is very keen that productive forestry is used to support construction and manufacturing industries, and that indeed is the government's ambition as well.
Dave Dugan.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland, like in so much else, leads the way in forestry and tree planting, with 10,000 hectares planting, fully 3/4 of all tree planting across these islands. Can the Secretary of State instruct the House on what championing he has done of Scotland's progress in this area around the Cabinet table, or is he too cowering?
Well, not only do I champion it, Mr. Speaker, I also plant trees myself.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr. Speaker, almost 90,000 food parcels were given to children in Scotland last year, and the trend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll answer questions 10 and 14 together. This government is committed to tackling child poverty and protecting the most vulnerable in society. In the recent budget, the Chancellor announced additional support measures for households and families across Scotland, and indeed across all parts of the United Kingdom. A further example of support for families was announced earlier today, with the UK government making childcare more affordable.
Wendy
Chamberlain. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Almost 90,000 food parcels were given to children in Scotland last year, and the Trussell Trust Hunger in Scotland report showed that single parents make up only 2% of the population, but 17% of those who have gone hungry. This is about insufficiency of income, but the adult rate of benefits should be restored to single parents under 25 on universal credit. There's a practical way for the UK government to support. Does the Minister agree?
Mr. Speaker, I recognise the work that the Honourable Lady undertakes with the APPG on food banks. We are protecting, the government are protecting the most vulnerable with a £94 billion support package for households, and have helped nearly 2 million people out of absolute poverty after housing costs since 2010.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Edinburgh West is not amongst the poorest in Scotland. Well, we already have 1 in 10 children, in some areas 1 in 3 children, living in poverty. 2/3 of them, their families, are actually working. So with the soaring food prices, sky-high mortgage rates, and Edinburgh having the highest increase in annual rents in the UK, families are struggling. We know that our Scottish Government is only interested in independence. So can the Minister tell me what the UK Government is going to do for those families?
Mr. Speaker, the government recognises the anxiety that people feel about rising mortgages. That's why the Prime Minister's priority is to halve inflation this year. That is the single best way that we can keep costs down and interest rates down for people, and we've got a clear plan to deliver that. The Chancellor also met with major mortgage lenders last week and has agreed a mortgage charter covering 75% of the market. Hopefully that will provide reassurance to mortgage holders and others affected by this.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in paying tribute to John Angeli, OBE, the Director of the Parliamentary Broadcasting, who is leaving the House service at the end of this week. During his 12 years as Director, John not only oversaw the expansion of live video coverage to all public proceedings, but delivered the hybrid capability which enabled Parliament to function during lockdown, and of course made history with President Zelensky beamed into this chamber. He has more recently brought live subtitling and British Sign Language to our proceedings. I am sure I speak on behalf of the whole House in thanking John and wishing him all the best in the future. We now start with questions to Prime Minister. Dr. Luke Evans.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, today will see the second reading of the Holocaust Memorial Bill. For decades, survivors like the late Sir Ben Helfgott showed the extraordinary courage to share their testimonies so that we would never forget. I hope the whole House will unite today to get this memorial built and put those testimonies at the heart of our democracy for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.